There are nights in Genoa City when the truth does not arrive like a confession. It arrives like a wound reopening at the exact moment everyone ran out of strength to survive another blow. What begins as a revelation that should have healed an old fracture, instead threatens to shatter what remains of a family already held together by grief, resentment, and years of buried betrayal. Kane stands at the center of it, pulled back into a storm he never asked to re-enter, forced to confront the unbearable fact that blood can bind people together just as cruelly as it can tear them apart. Holden comes to him with the kind of truth that changes the shape of every memory that came before it. Malcolm is his father. Lily is his half-sister. Stephanie, the woman who should have protected the truth instead of mutilating it, spent years hiding the reality of Holden's paternity behind lies, manipulations, and silence. But the timing makes the revelation feel less like justice and more like punishment, because Malcolm is dying, and the family does not have the luxury of processing what this means before they are dragged into a desperate race against time. Kane is hit first by disbelief, then by the far uglier emotion underneath it, rage. Not only at Stephanie for withholding something so enormous, but at the sickening thought that an entire life was built on false foundations, while everyone else moved through the world assuming they had the right map of their own bloodline. For Kane, the cruelty of it is layered. Malcolm is not some distant name in the family history. He is a man whose absence and presence have both shaped the emotional weather of those around him. To learn now that Holden belongs to that legacy, that Lily has a brother she never knew existed, that all of it was hidden until Malcolm's body began to fail, feels grotesque. It feels calculated, even if Stephanie's eventual confession came wrapped in panic rather than malice. Kane cannot stop thinking about motive. Why now? Why after all these years? Why only when a diseased bone marrow and a narrowing window for survival made the truth suddenly useful? The revelation is contaminated by necessity, and that is what makes it so hard to accept as anything noble. The truth did not come because conscience finally won. It came because Malcolm's illness cornered someone who thought she could outlive her own deception. Holden, for his part, is carrying the humiliation of finding out that his life has been rewritten without his consent. He has barely had time to understand what it means to be Malcolm's son before being thrust into the brutal role of possible savior. The emotional whiplash is merciless. One moment he is standing in the wreckage of his own identity, trying to grasp that Lily is family, that the man he thought he was is now split into a before and an after. The next, he is being tested, measured, weighed by medicine, hope, and desperation. When the results reveal that he is not a match, the disappointment around him becomes impossible not to absorb, no matter how carefully anyone tries to hide it. Holden feels it in the room, in the pauses between words, in the way compassion always has a shadow when someone is dying, and another chance has just been lost. He is not responsible for Malcolm's condition, not responsible for Stephanie's deception, not responsible for biology's refusal to cooperate, and yet guilt clings to him anyway. That is the cruelty of families in crisis. Even innocence begins to feel like failure. When Kane looks at Holden after the test results come back, he sees more than a devastated young man. He sees the cost of secrets weaponized by adults who believed they had the right to edit fate. Kane's anger sharpens into something colder and more dangerous because he understands what this is doing to Lily. Whatever damage sits unresolved between him and Lily, whatever bitterness, pride, or old heartbreak still lingers, it cannot fully suppress what rises in him now. He knows Lily well enough to understand the particular kind of torment she is walking through. She has been handed a brother, and the possible loss of a father, almost in the same breath. There is no graceful way to receive that. There is no emotional sequence that makes sense of joy contaminated by dread. The one thing that should have expanded her world has instead arrived carrying the threat of funeral flowers. Lily tries to remain composed because she has spent too many years being the one who survives, the one who organizes, the one who steadies others when they begin to fracture. But this crisis finds the old scar tissue in her and presses hard. Malcolm's illness awakens every fear she has about fragility, about the body as a traitor, about time running out while people are still trying to repair what should have been mended years ago. Worse, there is a special brutality in knowing she cannot be the one to help him. Her own medical history disqualifies her. Her love, her devotion, her grief, none of it matters against biology. She cannot give Malcolm the marrow he needs. She cannot step into the role her heart is begging to fill. That helplessness turns inward and mutates into anger, not just at fate, but at Stephanie for withholding a truth that might have changed everything if it had come sooner. Not just at circumstances, but at herself, for all the lost years in which Holden might have been known, loved, and woven into the family before this medical catastrophe forced everyone into collision. Stephanie becomes the silent center of everyone's fury. Her confession may have opened the door to the truth, but it also confirms the scale of the betrayal. In Lily's mind, Stephanie did not merely keep a secret. She stole time. She stole relationships. She stole the possibility of trust. Now every compassionate gesture she tries to make feels contaminated by the memory of what she hid. Every explanation sounds too late, too thin, too self-serving. Lily's anger toward her is not explosive at first. It is far worse. It is surgical. It is the kind of anger that reorganizes how a person is seen forever. Stephanie goes from flawed to unforgivable in Lily's eyes, because what she concealed was not just scandalous. It was foundational. Family, identity, inheritance of pain and love alike. All of it was distorted because Stephanie decided she knew better than everyone else what truths they could bear. And now she wants grace in the middle of a medical emergency. Now she wants understanding because the lie has become inconvenient. Lily cannot give that to her. Not while Malcolm's life hangs in the balance. Not while Holden is still trying to stand upright inside the ruins of his own past. Kane is drawn deeper into the conflict than he expected, partly because he cannot stop himself from trying to protect Lily even when she resents being protected, and partly because Crisis has a way of resurrecting old loyalties people pretend to have buried. He throws himself into the search for answers, with the restless energy of a man who cannot bear to stand still while someone he once loved is unraveling. But his involvement does not comfort everyone. In fact, it complicates things. There are still too many unresolved wounds between him and Lily, too many memories of broken trust, poor choices, and emotional absences. His concern is real, but reality has never guaranteed forgiveness. Lily sees his support and feels two things at once: gratitude and rage. Gratitude because she knows he is one of the few people strong enough to endure this kind of pressure without collapsing. Rage because his presence reminds her of everything else in her life that did not hold. In moments of exhaustion, she almost hates that he can still affect her, still read her fear, still anticipate her breaking point before she reaches it. It feels like one more loss of control in a moment already dominated by powerlessness. As the family waits on the twins' test results, hope becomes its own form of torture. Every hour stretches. Every phone call changes the emotional temperature of the room. The twins, pulled into a drama they are too young to fully understand and yet old enough to feel, become symbols of possibility no one dares lean on too heavily. Lily is horrified by what that means. She knows the tests are necessary. She knows Malcolm needs a miracle. But the idea that these children are now being asked, by blood and by circumstance, to carry the weight of adult failures sickens her. What should have remained their innocent place within the family is suddenly overshadowed by medical probability and whispered panic. She begins to spiral, not only over Malcolm's fate, but over the generational cruelty of it all. One lie from years ago has now reached forward into the lives of children who had no part in creating this mess. That realization deepens her fury and hardens her resolve. She stops thinking only about saving Malcolm and starts thinking about what justice looks like afterward, because there has to be an afterward. There has to be accountability. There has to be someone left standing who refuses to let everyone move on as if secrecy was just another unfortunate mistake. Holden, meanwhile, senses that his arrival has detonated old emotional landmines he did not know existed. He wants connection, and is almost ashamed of wanting it, because how can he ask for acceptance while Malcolm lies sick, and the family is too frightened to breathe normally? Yet the longing is there, to know Lily not as a stranger bound by bad timing, but as his sister. To know whether there might have been room for him in this family, if the truth had not been delayed until the worst possible moment. To find out whether Malcolm would have loved him openly, had he known. These questions gnaw at him, and the pain of not having answers curdles into anger of his own. He begins to resent Stephanie not just for lying, but for deciding his emotional life on his behalf. He resents the way illness has turned his existence into a practical consideration rather than a human revelation. He was introduced to this family through a medical emergency. He was assessed first as potential rescue, not as blood. Even when everyone tries to welcome him, the order of events cannot be undone. That bitterness becomes a quiet fire inside him, one that threatens to change him if no one reaches him in time. Kane notices it. He recognizes the dangerous edge in Holden because he has seen what happens when unclaimed pain festers in a man who feels dispossessed by his own history. And that recognition pushes him toward a decision that could either stabilize the family or ignite a war. He begins investigating the full extent of Stephanie's deception, not out of curiosity, but out of strategic necessity. He wants to know who else knew. He wants dates, records, private conversations, all the pieces that might reveal whether this was one woman's long-term secret or a larger network of silence. The deeper he digs, the uglier the possibility becomes. If Stephanie manipulated medical records, if she buried documents, if she pressured anyone into helping conceal the truth, then this is no longer only a family betrayal. It is an ethical crime with consequences that could explode beyond the household. Kane understands the risk of pursuing that line while Malcolm is still fighting for his life. Exposure could fracture the family at the moment they most need unity. But he also understands the other risk, letting the truth remain blurred because people are afraid of the damage clarity might cause. He has lived long enough to know that hidden rot only spreads. Lily senses that Kane is moving in the background, pulling on threads, gathering information, possibly preparing to force answers into the open, and she is torn. Part of her wants exactly that. She wants names, proof, blame assigned with precision. She wants Stephanie cornered by the full weight of what she has done. She wants every convenient excuse stripped away. But another part of Lily is horrified by what scandal could do to Malcolm in his final vulnerable stretch. If he survives, he will wake into a war over the secret that robbed him of years with a son. If he dies, that war will unfold in the shadow of his death and poison every attempt at mourning. The choice becomes unbearable. Delay justice and live with the stench of cowardice. Demand justice now and risk tearing apart whatever fragile unity is helping Malcolm hold on. This is where Lily's inner conflict becomes almost impossible to endure, because both paths require sacrifice and neither promises peace. The pressure starts changing everyone's behavior. Old resentments are no longer kept in check. Stephanie, sensing that control has slipped from her hands, begins to justify herself in ways that only deepen the damage. The more she insists she had reasons, the more monstrous those reasons sound. Protection, timing, fear of consequences, fear of losing people, fear of disrupting lives already in motion. To her, they may feel complicated. To everyone else, they sound selfish. She had years to correct the lie and chose not to. Now she watches as the people she once believed she was preserving turn against her one by one. The isolation terrifies her, and fear makes her reckless. She starts withholding small details, trimming facts, still trying to manage the narrative even after the larger truth has collapsed. Kane catches it first. Lily confirms it next. That is the moment Stephanie loses whatever little sympathy remained. Because even now, with Malcolm dying, with Holden broken open, with Lily barely holding herself together, Stephanie cannot fully surrender control. She would rather be partially honest than completely exposed. This sends Kane into a darker state of mind. He stops seeing the situation merely as tragic and starts seeing it as a battle over who gets to define reality. That shift matters. It hardens him. It makes him more willing to act ruthlessly if that is what it takes to protect Lily and the children from more damage. He begins drawing lines, excluding Stephanie from crucial conversations, forcing medical and family matters into channels she can no longer manipulate. It is not done gently. It is done with the cold decisiveness of a man who has decided mercy is now a liability. This creates backlash. Some see him as overstepping. Others wonder whether his protective instincts are really about Malcolm or about unresolved feelings for Lily. Both may be true, and that ambiguity makes his role even more combustible. Kane is no saint in this story. His anger gives him focus, but it also gives him permission to become controlling in the name of order. He tells himself he is preventing further chaos. Yet under that is a more personal hunger, the chance to be indispensable to Lily again, the chance to stand where he failed before, the chance to matter in the one crisis that has reopened every locked room between them. Lily sees through that, and it infuriates her even as part of her leans on him. She does not want to be rescued by a man whose history with her is filled with wounds. She does not want her grief to become the bridge back to emotional dependence. But disaster has a way of humiliating pride. There are moments when she needs his strength, and every one of those moments leaves her angrier at the universe for making him useful. Their dynamic becomes charged with everything neither of them can say. Old love twisted by current resentment, mutual understanding poisoned by mistrust, shared fear over Malcolm, shared outrage over Stephanie, shared protectiveness over the twins. They move around each other like two survivors trapped in the same burning building, each knowing the other may be the reason they get out alive and the reason they cannot heal afterward. Then comes the waiting, the most unbearable part of all, when the family is suspended between medical science and emotional collapse. Malcolm's condition deteriorates in quiet increments that feel more terrifying than any dramatic crash. Machines, consultations, guarded expressions from doctors, every detail tightens the vice. Lily begins imagining futures she cannot bear. Holden starts living in the ache of almost belonging. Kane turns more watchful, more severe, as though vigilance alone can hold the walls up. And beneath it all, a darker question grows louder. If Malcolm does not survive, what becomes of this family when grief is no longer mixed with hope, but sharpened by blame? Because grief alone is devastating, but grief with a culprit is explosive. That is what makes the entire situation feel less like a tragedy and more like the beginning of a war. Malcolm's illness is the immediate crisis, but beneath it lies the more dangerous story. A family discovering that love, loyalty, and truth were all manipulated by human choice. That kind of revelation does not end with tears at a hospital bedside. It breeds factions. It breeds revenge. It breeds the kind of emotional violence that can echo for years. Lily may survive Malcolm's illness, but she will not emerge unchanged. Holden may be welcomed, but he will never forget the terms under which he arrived. Kane may prove himself invaluable, but in doing so, he risks becoming entangled again in the very heart he once failed to protect. And Stephanie, whatever happens next, has already crossed into the place from which some betrayals never return. In Genoa City, secrets rarely die quietly. They mutate, they spread, and when the people at the center of them are desperate enough, they do not just destroy trust, they turn blood into a battlefield.